I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. So the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Waswa-speaking Yupi tribe, the Amamutsan tribal band comprised of descendants of indigenous people taken to missions Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. I'm Lydia Zendejas. I'm the project director, HSI Grants. I've been on the team for about a year and a half. I have a little bit over 13 years of experience working here at UC Santa Cruz. And I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charis Herzon. My pronouns are she and her, and I get the pleasure to serve as the director for the Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives. I've been in my role as the director for about 4 years, but have been serving students on our campus for a little over 21 years. I'm really excited to be here today and share with you information both about HSI and our grant GANAS Career.
So this is UC Santa Cruz inaugural HSI week. And as a member of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, we call it HACU. We are joining and observing National HSI Week. So this is the first time for us. The week is observed by colleges and universities across the nation. Social media, virtual events, and campus activities are encouraged to heighten awareness of the important role HSI play in improving access to education and advancing equity for traditionally underserved students. So plans are underway for several members of Congress to recognize the contributions of HSIs in their community. Interestingly enough, today, September 16th, marks the day when Catholic priest Miguel Hidalgo called for independence from Spain in the Grito de Dolores in 1810. So Mexican Independence Day coincides with Hispanic Heritage Month. And it's just really nice that this year we're kicking off HSI Week. We're doing it for the first time. We're recognizing it for the first time. And today happens to be Mexican Independence Day. Not to say that all Hispanics are from Mexico. Don't get me wrong. Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide. Make sure I get that. Okay, I want to just put a disclaimer out that the contents of this presentation were developed under a grant from the Department of Education. However, this content does not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. What are we trying to achieve today? So we want our audience, and right now it's not a big audience, but that's okay, to understand the gaps identified to be addressed through GANAS Career activities in order to reach our goals. We want to engage in a conversation about these activities, discuss kind of what we've accomplished in year one and what waits ahead for us in year two. And just to clarify, grant years for us start on October 1st and they go through September 30th. So we don't go on the traditional kind of either academic calendar, nor do we go on a traditional kind of fiscal year calendar. We got to keep, everyone on their toes. All right, Shar.
So a couple of things that we wanted to give you a little bit of context is just what is an HSI? So HSI, as you probably heard when we were first talking, stands for Hispanic Serving Institution. And it's a federal designation given to universities that enroll a high number of Hispanic and low-income students. And to qualify as an HSI, our undergraduate enrollment needs to be 25% or more of students who self-identify as Hispanic. HSIs are actually part of a larger umbrella of what's called minority serving institutions. This includes HBCUs, so historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, HSIs, and ANAPISIs. ANAPISI stands for Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution. So UC Santa Cruz is actually both an HSI as well as an ANAPISI. So for a little bit of context about HSIs and ANAPZs, typically these have been colleges that were previously predominantly white serving institutions. Thus, policies and practices were often not created with the intentionality of serving the students they currently enrolled, unlike HBCUs and tribal colleges. But for us, the real part of the HSI is the serving aspect. So UCSC, like many colleges who embrace their HSI identity, really want to unpack serving. For this, we really look to Gina Garcia's work, who has identified the term servingness. So Garcia defines servingness to include validating experiences within structures of the university. You might be familiar with Rendon's work of validation. Identifying and evaluating racialized experiences within structures of the universities. So for us to claim that we're that we're really embracing the servingness of our students, if our students are having microaggressions, racialized microaggressions, or worse macroaggressions, can we really claim that we're serving our students just because we're enrolling 25% of Latinx students? We also analyze student academic outcomes. Often these are sort of the traditional outcomes that you might consider thinking about: graduation rates, retention, grades. And then we also want to think about the analysis of students' non-academic outcomes. So how are our students feeling the sense of belonging here? Are they feeling included? What's their self-efficacy? Those sorts of things. So you can see servingness really goes much beyond just the number of Latinx and low-income undergraduate students that simply enroll. And for GANAS Career, we even want to expand this idea of servingness even beyond academic outcomes and non-academic outcomes to think about what sort of careers are students having access to, what's the social mobility, what sort of student debt are students having. Again, really thinking about this larger picture of our students. Next slide. So for the HSI initiatives, we have sort of two main arms of this. So we have an HSI leadership committee. The committee evolved since 2012 and is currently made up of 5 faculty and 7 staff. All the faculty and staff who are on this committee are both institutional change agents and really champions for racial equity. Our leadership team uses research questions. We have a shared vision. We've developed principles that really guide our work. And the work really, as we shape our work, we use logic models, which really serve as maps. And the key to a logic model is actually the theoretical underpinnings. And in our case, it's the Latin. So for our case, we're really thinking about theories for Latinx student success. For our student success model, we use Hurtado's theory of change of the diverse learning environment. Additionally, in developing grants, the individual activities that we have all have what we consider to be an evidence of promise, meaning that they're published. All of them have publications behind them showing that these practices are expected to have positive results for student success specific to that area. The other arm of it, which has a lot more folks on it, is our grant committees. So in the HSI initiatives, we administer several grants, but even before we administer them, we start with a grant writing team. If the grant is awarded, we then have implementation teams. And finally, since the Department of Education grants, which are the main grants that we've been working with, are only funded for 5 years, we really also need to be thinking about the offboarding or sustainability. So this is sometimes a surprise for people. Some grants that are out there can be renewed every 5 years. Our grants are not like that. They're really intended to target programs and institutional practices that really build us as an institution in our servingness. To get kind of a sense of the size and scope of the number of people who work on the grants, I did a count of folks who are working on just GANAS Career, and we have 3 grants currently, but this is just for GANAS Career. Currently, we're at about 30. So this includes faculty and staff. Some of those are funded by the grant, some of them are not, as well as many student positions that are also funded by the grants. So next slide, please. So to dig in a little bit more to kind of how our framework for how we're expecting to have this student level impact through the practitioners is we look to Dowd and Ben Simone's practitioner inquiry cycle. So if you look at one of the little boxes there on the left, and it's super small to see, but the one that's right next to the, yep, there you go. Thanks, Lydia. What that says is it encourages us to use disaggregated data and really reflect on what that seems to be telling us. So you want to think about who has access, what does enrollment look like, what are experiences, what are student outcomes, and really be working with, practitioners who we know have that ability to be reflective and change their practices. So that's why you at the top see that they have an adaptive expertise. So they're able to adapt in that way. As you go over to the right a little bit more, you see institutional policies and practices. So here we really, this sort of potential for organizational change requires that we have these practitioners who are willing to change their knowledge, their belief, and expertise through this problem identification, that through identifying and solving it will then influence this changes to policies and practices. So when we're thinking about that, you really wanted to think, do we have policies and practices that better serve certain students? So do we rely on students having a really high navigational capital? They just, can move across campus, know that there's resources, that sort of things. What does the hidden curriculum look like on our campus? How are students experiencing that? So we really often have this goal to better serve students. It does require this experimentation and trying new things. So we really want to think about how we can be curious, how we can be vulnerable to have that institutional impact. And I want to note here that the student outcome changes all the way on the right. So it means you're having to go through all of those things, have the institutional impact to really have that student change or that student outcome change that we're really striving for. So with that, I'll transition it back to Lydia for a deeper dive into GANAS Career.
Thanks, Shar. So essentially, this past year that we've had GANAS Career, we were getting it off the ground. And I wanted to talk a little bit about and share what is, as Charis explained, what is a grant that we get from the Department of Education. And when we're trying to pilot interventions that we'll see if they're, after 5 years, have they made a difference? But essentially, this GANAS Career Pathways Grant is considered an HSI Title V Part A. So it's part of their Developing Hispanic Serving Institutions program, which provides grants to assist HSIs to expand educational opportunities for and improve the attainment of Hispanic students. So these grants also enable HSIs to expand and enhance their academic offerings, program quality, and institutional stability. We have, as you'll see later in the slides, you'll see like how we're going to achieve, what goals we're going to achieve, what we're going to look at specifically in this grant. But this past year really was, like Charis mentioned, we've had 30 people across campus working to kind of develop and kind of write out a structure, understand how we're all going to work with each other. And so just to get things off the ground, it's like, imagine trying to start a new office, right? And how much work that takes. And so really year 2 is when we're hoping to see the work. Some of the work has already started, as you'll hear from Lexi a little bit later, with supplemental instruction. But really it's getting into full force as far as many of the activities. One of the other activities that's been going on kind of in the background as well is with our math faculty, where they've been meeting to work on the calculus redesign of Math 11A. So I wanted to share a little bit about the people that are working with us and making the magic happen. and our executive steering committee. So me as the chair as project director, and then we have Charis as our principal investigator, and that's principal investigator on our campus. And then we have Catherine Cooper. She has been working with HSI grants from the start, and she's our research and evaluation faculty advisor. She's an emerita professor in psychology. Then we have Juan Poblete. He's a professor in literature. He's also, him and Catherine are both co-PIs along with Charis. Then we have one of our newer members to the team, Gwendolyn Rivera. She's our equity research and data analyst. And then we also have two other people from across campus, the Associate Director of Experiential Learning and Student Employment, Veronica High School, and the Interim Director of Learning Support Services, Sharon Castro. So just want to give them recognition. Basically, they're the ones who are overseeing, making sure that we're meeting, that everything is kind of started, and people are working on what they should be working and having the bigger vision of the grant and the overall goals for the 5 years and not just year by year. Okay, so I'm gonna get into the meat of it. I'm just kind of doing a quick time check for myself. 422, we're doing well. Essentially, so these are our grant objectives. As you see on the right, we have our gaps and then we have goals. And so essentially these grant objectives align with each of those gaps and goals. And so if we take, for example, the first one, equity disparities in calculus, something that we started with HSI grants in Math 2 and in Math 3, and we're continuing this with this continuum of calculus redesign where we see disparities of academic performance of either underrepresented minorities or Latinx students who are not up to par and receiving the same type of grades as white students. And so how do you address that? And this is one of the ways that we have decided is that we want to do a redesign. So in order to increase achievement and equity in calculus, we want to do that calculus redesign. Then there's the second one. So there's graduation gap. And we wanted to basically address this through supplemental instruction. And so when we can increase achievement and, reduce racial social disparities in key gateway major courses, we believe we can address the graduation gap. Then we have the internship experiences and financial equity gaps. So essentially, in the development of the grant, it was found that a lot of Latinx students or underrepresented minorities did not have the type of internship experiences that other students on campus have had. So what are we going to do to address that? And so we thought this is a perfect opportunity in this grant. Let's be focused, let's be intentional in offering programs, and then let's, along with that, provide career coaching. And like I'll get a little bit, I'm getting more into the meat of it, but essentially that's just one way that we were going to look at that. And then the last one was what we're calling our departmental selfie and addressing racial equity gaps. And the departmental selfie is, the notion is to work with departments. And so it's really an opportunity to build institutional capacity by providing coaching support to academic and student service departments to identify and disrupt barriers and practices and policies that contribute to racial inequity. So that is a lot. And so I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is, like I said before, when I started talking a little bit about curriculum redesign, the leads for us in this activity for calculus redesign are Nandini Bhattacharya and Pedro Morales Almazan. This year, they're focusing on Math 11A. For next year, will be Math 11B. And essentially what they're doing is they want to be able to focus on inclusiveness and equity by implementing active learning and problem solving sessions. And so this will be available to other faculty in the future so that they can adopt that. And that's the goal. And they hired a graduate student researcher over the summer to work with them. So that's another benefit that we've had. Okay, so I'm going to transition to supplemental instruction, and I would like for you, Lexi, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Lydia. Hello, everybody. My name is Lexi Tapke. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And like Lydia said, I'm the coordinator currently for supplemental instruction. It's the second goal of the GANAS Career Grant. And so I'm mostly just going to briefly talk about what is supplemental instruction, some of the history of it, and what we're doing with it that's a little different from what we've done in the past with our current programs. So supplemental instruction, I did give a blurb there that I've been using in trainings with faculty and staff and students. So I'll let you read it, but I'll put it into some simple terms. It is an international program that comes from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I think this year is their 50th anniversary, so it's definitely been around for a while. And because it's been around for a while, that means there's a lot of research and a lot of peer reviews in terms of how successful it is. And so I have highlighted a few pieces of what that research looks like and what it's told us, and why we look to a program such as supplemental instruction and why we're using it as a goal in this GANAS grant. So with supplemental instruction, it really focuses mostly on active learning strategies, a high touch level of support for students and faculty in courses, and also a lot of collaborative learning techniques. So a lot of those things we do currently use in our programs, such as MSI, which I think a lot of folks do know learning support services as the most. But even in the name, MSI is modified supplemental instruction. So you can kind of tell already that we've been looking at SI for many years. Charis has been looking into it for many years, and it's definitely been the blueprint for a lot of the values and the way that we approach learning with students. So currently, what support has looked like and what we want to do differently with SI is kind of in that table I've outlined for you folks. So right now, with some of the funding that we do have and what we've done in the past, we're usually able to hire around 1 to 2 learning assistants for each course that we do support with our programs. And that usually typically looks like, in terms of sessions, that one learning assistant will prepare one type of session, and then they're holding it for a course multiple times throughout the week. So there's not a lot of wiggle room on that. And those sessions really look at a broad sense of the content for a course, especially a gateway course that maybe is historically difficult, especially historically difficult for marginalized students on campus. So the differences with SI allow us to kind of give that high support to students and to courses that have been historically difficult. So what that looks like, instead of just hiring one learning assistant for every course that we support, with SI, we're able to scale the number of SI leaders that are hired depending on the enrollment numbers. And so what this looks like is that it's just more availability for students to attend, and it's also giving a lot more support for faculty involved that have huge numbers of students in their courses. So not only that, SI leaders prepare not just one type of session for a week, they prepare a unique session for every single lecture in a week. So if they're attending lecture and it's a 3-way split, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday split, then that means the SI leader is creating 3 different kinds of sessions that week and repeatedly holding those throughout the week as well. And so that really allows, rather than a broad sense of the content that's happening in the week, they're really able to dive deeply into whatever is happening in that specific lecture, which really comes in handy for a lot of those gateway courses. And especially students who, probably don't come from very similar educational backgrounds. Maybe the content is moving super fast. This really allows for a lot more time, a lot more attention, and a lot more support for each of those students to really grasp that lecture before moving on to the next. So we have done a pilot of supplemental instruction this past summer. We were able to support 2 courses, CSE 12 and Physics 6A. Both of these courses have had pretty large rates of DFW rates and also a lot of disparities. So that's why we go into those choices of courses. And we're now able to fully implement with 4 courses. So we're expanding to CSE 20-02 and also Bio 20A. So if anybody's interested in learning more about that, how specifically we're able to meet some of the goals that are in the GANAS grant, I'm happy to talk, and I'll probably drop my email in the chat for the folks that are here. But I'll pass it back to you, Lydia, if you'd like.
Thanks so much. And so I wanted to also kind of mention that, you know, these are Hispanic serving institution grants, right? But that doesn't mean that only HSI, that only Hispanic students can benefit. Anyone across campus can benefit from supplemental instruction, right, Lexi? So how would I guess a student know that they could take advantage of like SI compared to the traditional MSI that we've offered on campus?
So yeah, a lot of information is obviously found on our website, but one unique aspect of SI support is that it's very, it really involves a lot of faculty involvement. And so I think a student who would be involved in SI is mostly going to hear it from their faculty or the professor that's teaching their course. And we also go into a lot of different aspects of course selection. So hopefully at some point, you know, as Charis was talking about longevity of all these goals, we're hoping that we can take SI and implement it into even other courses so that it's not really just these 4 courses that are always supported. We can really expand this kind of high level of support for other courses that are seeing the same kinds of disparities. Did I answer your question? Let me know if I did it.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so the third activity with GANAS Career is our internship program. Our lead there, her name is Alma Orozco. She works at Career Success. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us today. But this particular activity, the purpose is to increase career advising, internship opportunities, and financial literacy of Latino, low income and underrepresented students. So how are we going to do that? We saw the need to have more paid internships in high demand fields that include, not exclusive to, STEM, biotech, health, agriculture, teaching, and accounting finance. While they're participating in the internship, the students will receive career readiness and financial literacy coaching. So they'll be meeting with Alma and getting this coaching directly from her. And of course, you know, we're hoping to serve underrepresented minority students. If you're wondering about how many students or how many internships we're looking at the max, probably for this coming year, we're looking at 15 placements. It really all depends on how many internship sites we can really get on board with us. I forgot to mention at the very beginning, feel free to use the chat if you have questions, and Elena's going to help me and she'll ping me and let me know. Okay, for activity 4, the departmental selfie, our leads are Charis Herzon, who's here in the room with us, Juan Poblete, and Gwendolyn Rivera. So in this particular activity, the goal is to build institutional capacity by providing coaching support to academic and student services departments to identify and disrupt barriers and practices and policy that contribute to racial inequity. This is really something, it's like it started with the data dashboards that IRAPS has come out with. That was really a collaboration with HSI and Fiddle and IRAPS, which is the 2 different offices on campus. So really, this is about changing practices. If we think about institutional change, it happens when we're all able to kind of on the ground work a little bit differently and maybe even out of our comfort zone. In working together, we've been able to really expand the idea of data dashboards and what they're about. And then anyone who wanted to take a look and see, well, I want to know how I'm doing if I'm a faculty member, right? I want to know how I'm doing in my class and how are my students performing? Are there disparities for the students that are taking my class? They can easily go and make this, look at the data dashboards, where in the past, that type of information was not readily available. So the goal with this particular activity is we want to help departments develop interventions and work with them side by side. And so each year, starting in year 2, we'll work with 2 different departments. This coming year in year 2, we will be working with linguistics and the molecular cell and developmental biology departments. Okay, that's really all I had. I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion, but I wanted to, while you're thinking of your questions, I wanted to give some acknowledgement. These type of efforts from the Hispanic serving institutions are not done alone. They're not done in isolation. Really, it takes a lot of people and a lot of effort. And we want to give recognition to the former principal investigator, Dr. Pablo Reguerin, who is now at UC Davis. He's the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs over there. And then with grant development and implementation, Professor Catherine Cooper, Juan Poblete, and then Didier Bhattacharya, and then Sheris Herzon, Asia Valdivia, Jennifer Bazile, who's our interim Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs and Success, and Maria Garcia. They were all key members of writing the grants and what was in the grants. And so it took a lot of effort. And then there's the HSI Leadership Committee, which, as Charis explained earlier, has really been institutionalized. What started as a task force is now an official committee. And we, the leadership committee, we meet regularly with the chancellor and the CPVC to give them some updates, but at the same time, really involve them in the conversation about our work and help prioritize our work. Then lastly, as I've mentioned before, there's the GANAS Career Executive Steering Committee and our grant implementation team. So all of this is not done with, like I said, just by a few of us. It really takes a team effort from everyone. In case you're all interested, a lot of our work, if not all of our work, is guided by research. And so if you're interested in the references that were mentioned before, these are them. And oh, want to put in a plug. One more event happening tomorrow, Friday, September 17th at 11 a.m. GANAS Graduate Holistic Counseling and Voices Information Session. And Angel Dominguez is here and he'll be presenting on that tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. And then, like I said, open it up to any discussion, comments, questions. It's really, there's only 8 of us, so it's good.
We do have one question about what departmental selfie. What are examples of interventions?
Yeah, I'm going to try and take a stab at this, Charis, but I might need your assistance maybe. I think about like the work that we've done, for example, in SEMIA. It's the current HSI STEM grant that we have right now. And I'm working with Professor John Tamkin. So we think about, how is it that a professor teaches and how do they connect with students? And really making, even like from what I've heard from John, small efforts as far as like how to connect with students, where students really feel, one, engaged and an increased sense of belonging. And when they feel an increased sense of belonging, that allows them then to be more involved with their academics, right? And then there's also the piece about how they teach. So it's not just about what they might talk about when they teach, but how do they teach? So the idea of maybe a flipped classroom and a kind of active learning, which, that concept to me is I'm not entirely familiar with, but Charis, if you would like to expand, I'd love to hear a little bit from what your perspective is. But really it's about really addressing equity disparity. So honestly, before that even happens, you have to figure out where are the disparities. Right. And so if in linguistics, there's a particular class, for example, that students have to take in order to declare the major, we would look to see if there's any disparities. And if there are, then we would want to work with the department to say, okay, what's going on? What do you think is happening in this class? And then take it from there and then work on a plan that the faculty think that they could then implement, right? And so those are just some ideas.
Yeah, I think I would just, thanks, Lydia. That was really comprehensive. So I just would add in a couple of things. So I think one of the ideas is to think about student pathways, right? So if you go to our catalog, it's a static printed thing, and it generally shows take this class first quarter, this class second quarter. It's like, well, what about, for students who maybe have a different pathway? So what's our pathways for our undeclared students? What's a pathway for a student who maybe changes their major? What's a pathway for our transfer students? And really thinking about, so in that, a lot of times where we'll start with the departments is through what we call a curriculum map. And it gives you a visual of sort of how the courses are linking together, and to really kind of think of it in the big picture for that. The other things that we're encouraging, or that we're kind of starting with, like Lydia mentioned, just kind of where are we starting there? And we start with, what are the demographics of the students who graduate from your program? What sort of GPAs do students graduate there with? And really disaggregate that data, not only racially, but thinking about how you might disaggregate that, with gender, with socioeconomic status, or maybe even combining some of those. Also, who declared but who didn't graduate. So if you're going to, again, thinking about a student pathway, often our frosh students come in, they may have a proposed major, then eventually they go to a declared major. And then generally, of course, you go from declared to graduated. For our transfer students, they're coming in as declared majors mostly. So again, who declares but doesn't graduate? That's a pretty significant, that would give you a pretty good idea of maybe something that would be a barrier there. As Lydia mentioned, who passes the required courses? So that people have maybe seen bubble charts of grades. And again, that gives you an idea. And so like Lexi was talking about, if there's a class that just consistently has high DFW rates, we're sort of thinking, this is not a problem with our students. This is just a really hard class. And so again, how can we bring together and really coordinate with learning support services to target those classes, to again, give them the practices like Lexi was talking about. And then also thinking about what are the demographic data for your faculty and for your students. So that one, just again, thinking about awareness of what does it mean for representation. We have a much more diverse undergraduate population at UCSC. And as you go into the graduate student, we get less diverse. And you get also less diverse as you're going up, sort of going from staff, administrators, high level administrators and things like that. So building some of that awareness, and then thinking about when you don't have representation in your department, how can we be really intentional again about how we're including students and serving our students? So.
All right, thank you, Charis. We have another question. For the career and the tutoring, do you all plan to include more social science and or arts internships, career internships, and tutoring? If so, when? Now, it's a long question if you need me to read it again.
Oh, no,
It's okay. Sorry, Lydia, I can talk at least a little bit about the tutoring aspect of it. So with the GANAS Careers Grant, we've really seen, we're taking an approach of very specific courses that we want to focus on in terms of DFW rates. So students who are receiving D or F grades, and then also students that are withdrawing from the class. And we mostly see those kinds of rates and disparities in STEM courses currently. So that's really where our focus is currently, but luckily, at least in tutoring, we do have support systems for other social science courses and art courses. And ways that kind of connects to the GANAS Careers Grant that we are implementing some changes is in our mentor program. So because we do have tutoring support in those discourses, we also have been building out our mentor program, which in effect helps our mentors and tutors do their positions better, have lots of more professional development, and that trickles down into those sessions. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, like sense of belonging, a personal connection to your studies, having a sense of community in general at UC Santa Cruz, those kinds of things have been getting built out a little bit more in those discourses. But what I can tell, at least in tutoring and what's connected to the GANAS Careers Grant, is that there is a huge need in STEM courses, especially drawing the distinction or the connection between they're studying it, they're going after these majors, and really following their success throughout until they graduate and making sure that they do have pathways to careers. But I don't know if Lydia, if you wanted to speak more to the career aspect of it.
Of course. Thanks so much, Lexi, for jumping in there. And definitely for the careers, what happens when in the grant writing process is a lot of research is done, right? So we have to make a decision about like, where do we want to focus our efforts and our interventions? And so really with the research that was done, we saw that there's a lot of high demand careers out there and that we need to fill them. And so really this, some of the areas that I had mentioned before in the other slide, those were the areas that either currently have high demands or are gonna have high demands. And so we're really trying to keep our finger on the pulse. And so the other piece too is because we have such good thought partners and just good partners in general with many people across campus, career success is really going to help us to kind of like, if we need to kind of move the needle a little bit, if we need to make an adjustment, there is wiggle room. So essentially, again, we're really trying to respond to the needs. And so that's why, we might be kind of focused on certain areas, but like I shared earlier, they're also not exclusive. So it's really going to be kind of dependent on what we see and where the needs are. Yeah, Charles?
I just wanted to add in also, because this is a really great question. And, I think it's something that, again, how we're approaching the work in the HSI initiatives. And our GANAS graduate grant, it says GANAS graduate, but it actually has two pieces. So one piece really focuses on undergraduates. So we do, and then the other piece is focusing on our graduate students. So in the undergraduates, and that entire grant actually has a little bit more focus, actually a lot more focus in social sciences and arts and humanities. So in that program, there's actually 4 pieces that are intentional around this. So one is there's going to be a summer research opportunity that's, again, going to be in these areas for UCSC students. Again, really inviting, EOP students, our BIPOC students, our first gen students. It is open to everybody, but we're certainly like looking and to provide services and programming in those areas. So that's a 2-week summer program that'll be starting next year, and we'll have 4 implementations in the grant cycle. Our director who's here, actually I should have just had Sarah say this. So she's also going to be we'll be starting a course for students who are interested in taking a course to help guide them through the graduate school application process. So that course will be starting this year. Additionally, we're going to have careers in the creative economy. So this will be a thanks, Sarah. So this will be a course in the arts, really focused on thinking about sort of careers in that areas. And that one's actually going to be for undergraduates and graduate students. So that's going to be a cross-listed course, which we're really excited about. And lastly, our last piece is actually part of the Latinx initiatives for our future teachers. LIFT. And so that has 2 parts. So one part of it actually is going to be providing support for our undergraduate students who are interested in pursuing teaching degrees. And then the other part will be for graduate students who are coming here for the master's credential program. But really there's 4 areas there. So I'm really glad that you asked.
Okay. Thanks so much. everyone, Sarah and Carla, for your questions. Thanks for joining us. We're an intimate group in this Zoom room. As I said earlier, this was our first attempt of having these type of events for HSI Week. So, you know, we got to start somewhere. Angel, I wish you success tomorrow, and thank you everyone for joining us today.